Alright, what's up everyone? Welcome to the stream. My name is David Sinero and today we are playing The Last Survey. It's a really unique game about the future of humanity, and I was contacted to play it by the publisher. I was very curious about it, so I want to check it out. I'm assuming it's pretty short because they didn't ask me to play for a long time, but we'll see where that takes us. Because, well, it looks really unique, so I'm pretty sure it's gonna be at least worth a look. So let's jump in. How's it going? I've been away for 2 days due to vaccination side effects and resting side effects. But I hope you're all good. How goes it, Echo? If you see this icon, your patience is running low. Try slowing down. For the past year, I've been collecting data, and now my survey is done. I've been to Sudbury in the north and Hanumea in the Pacific, Salovo in the jungle and the desolate desert surrounding Mount Keith. I've seen the raw ore ripped from the earth, open pits ablaze, word guns, surface extractors chugging diesel, and the burning glow of molten opportunity. The deafening sound of the world eating itself rings loud in my ears, but now I am back returning from my research to share what I've heard. Was wandering around in Assassin's Creed Valhalla? Oh no. You started another long one, haven't you? I'm very sorry. Well, you have a little bit of the gamer ADD, don't you? So I'm sure you play other stuff in while that's going. I arrived at the last stop of my tour, the corporate headquarters of my employer, awaiting my scheduled meeting with Victor Ferreira. I took the elevator from the sheer glass and white concrete lobby up to the executive offices on the 19th floor. I've only been up here once before to celebrate a dividend payoff last year on the terrace looking out over Guarana Bay. If the game rating beat one game, start 2 more. How many are ongoing right now? It was a lovely view, but a somewhat bittersweet evening. I couldn't help but feel like the festivities were a rehearsal for the end of days. Champagne and caipirinha were raised and drained in seemingly endless succession. But eventually the well went dry, a fitting symbol of mining operations across the globe. They were all beaming that night. It's nothing but tight lips these days. Now I'm summoned again to the top floors, not to rejoice. This time, it's panic. 5 p.m. The office was eerily calm. I suppose these top floor types have perfected the nonchalant alarm necessary to command companies whose stock prices determine the economic success of entire nations. That couch, though, he's about to film a porno. An executive assistant set me in a designer recliner in a plush waiting area cordoned off by sheets of clear glass. They asked me if I'd like anything before meeting with Senor Ferreira. With Mr. Ferreira. Why didn't they translate that? Well, I guess asked for the Gefäßige. Well, how does all right, that works. I'm sure this game is made by someone who is from Brazil. Or Portugal, I guess. Hey, I understand it, so I can always translate it for you guys. I'm trying to run through as many games I missed before the end of the month, and school mode mindset goes into effect. Oh, yeah, that's fair. Before a meeting, I must have drank coffee at home, so I requested some water. The driver ruthlessly weaved through traffic between Santa Teresa and Botafogo, Brazil. Driving in Brazil, as in many other aspects of life here, necessitates agility. My drink arrived in an unexpected, timely fashion, delivered by a new stranger, someone I assumed to be a subordinate of my initial greeter. This individual was probably the assistant to the executive assistant, or perhaps the junior executive assistant. Either way, they smiled sheepishly and passed me the ceramic cup and saucer with steady hands. They clearly didn't know the news I was about to deliver. I could peer through the maze-like interior to spy on other near-identical waiting areas of other company dignitaries. Though similarly adorned and fashioned, this antechamber was slightly larger. Further down the hallway, there was also a scattering of meeting rooms concealed by drawn blinds. The rooms looked empty at the moment, but they had undoubtedly been buzzing with recent activity. The blinds still swayed slightly from the leftover breeze created from suits quickly being buttoned after a swift round of decision-making. I considered how many decisions had been made on this floor, sealing the fate of thousands of workers from Mozambique to New Caledonia. Their faces flashed before me, stark hard eyes beneath layers of earth and grease. Remember the rail yard workers in Onça Puma. Sites where pits of butted rail lines were coated with steam, a haze of sweat and diesel that would mix into a foul-smelling vapor. Clouds, both natural and artificial, would hang low over open veins, dulling sight lines and restricting windpipes. I spoke to many drillers and loaders during my trip. Though not necessary for my research, I felt that the technical data was only telling one side of the story. The other half could be told by the men and women who worked the floors up to 60 hours a week. The hazardous work conditions across the company's global operations are well documented, and the scant attention paid to safety has resulted in some very public disasters. By the way, this is the first time I am using my Switch controller. Not the most demanding game to try it on, but it feels good on the hands so far. So in the church. Oh, Melty. How goes it? How goes it, my little potato? Some of my employer's subordinate officers would take personal offense to my assessments, calling my remarks outright insulting, but the real effrontery is bearing witness to the almost absent expectations workers have for their bosses to uphold national safety regulations. Though I don't fault the pit, bosses and foremen, I blame the double-breasted, two-faced lobbyists who solicit lenient inspections through bribery and coercion, a practice long maintained by global industrialism. Still in all, whoever is responsible, the burden is most visibly carried by the miners themselves, slung over shoulders in repurposed burlap sacks, lashed around waists with burning nylon rope, gripped by blistered hands that will never fully heal. So Melty, how goes the attorneying? Have you been to Final Fantasy XIV lately? Last episode of the first game? Nice. Is it your first time playing, or did you play on DS? Did you have a DS? You emulated them? Okay. That's cool. I could never get a DS emulator to work. Even the DS ones. Wait, aren't they all on DS? The first three had Game Boy Advance versions. Okay, I did not know that. I guess I could have emulated them too, if I knew. But not worth it now since they're on PlayStation. The peers sitting in this corporate vestibule amplified the distance between what happens in the ground and what happens behind the desk. Oh yeah, I was asking, have you been to Final Fantasy XIV lately? Because I wanted to ask, how are the queues to log in? The vintage from the 19th floor was cash positive. Liquidity was up, debt down, shareholders appeased, margins stabilized. But analysts maintain their skepticism. You're fine? Not on the streamer data centers? Okay. No, rightfully so. I wasn't the first to conduct surveys, but my employment is unique in that the scope of my findings eclipses any other prospector study. My worry, shared by many of my academic peers, is that my work will not see daylight until it's already too late. I don't even know which are the streamer data centers. But I guess it's who is anyone else as big as Asmongold? I do follow Zepla. I don't think she's as big as him though. Lots of cool people follow her, though. No one's as big as Asmon. Right. I watched him finish A Realm Reborn. There was so many people like in the overworld. It's crazy. I don't even know how he's able to enjoy the game still. Witnessing a proverbial race to the bottom, into the pit, into the earth, for the very last dollar, to the deepest depth. Waiting to be ushered into Mr. Ferreira's suite, I didn't find much solace in my preparations. At one point I was comforted by the thought that my research would make a difference, one way or another. Even if I couldn't personally halt operations, I imagined my survey as a hand on the lever, ready to pull once the word came from upstairs. Now sitting upstairs, I can't muster that same confidence. It's not that I don't believe my argument is convincing. The binders resting in my leather satchel clearly outlined a dire situation. My research was unambiguous and forthright. In the final concluding pages of Section 12, ironically the first pages I expect Mr. Ferreira to read, my message is resoundingly clear. You're fucked. The rest of the binder was ostensibly padding to soften the blow, the pillow in front of the pistol. I was trying to savor my complimentary drink, a facile attempt to ice my nerves. Even in the ample air conditions, sweat beaded at my temples. Earlier in my career, I used to take beta blockers on a semi-regular basis before teaching lecture hall seminars. The mere thought of hundreds of freshmen staring at me with drowsy, hopeful, and naive eyes can dampen my palms. Time and experience have given way to a generally calmer disposition, and I wouldn't say that I'm a particularly nervous person. But I am a scientist after all. We're not a naturally charismatic bunch. It seemed as though more than enough time had passed for word of my arrival to reach Victor's inner chamber. I should expect the natural delays that plague operations of this magnitude. I've come to expect Victor's attention being pulled in a million directions at once. It comes with the territory of the 19th floor. You can't be up here if you aren't juggling several meetings simultaneously, writing an email while talking on speakerphone, reading a report while watching the stock ticker, signing off on public memos while placating shareholders. Victor, like most executives I've met, was a quarry of cognitive dissonance. You could smell the miasma of doublespeak seeping out his pores. Like most men in power, he could talk at length without really saying anything, hurling countless syllables and sentences at your general direction without taking a position one way or another about any particular topic. The breeze of words that wafted from his mouth could be interpreted as chilly or balmy. It would merely depend on your temperature and temperament. His talk was engineered to be that way, manufactured out of a careful verbal lexicon of convincing neutrality. For Victor, language was a mirror, a shield of glass that could tilt this way and that to represent the best advantage of yourself back to you. But somehow, every time I hear him speak, I find myself forming an opinion. I'd instinctively react, formulating responses and criticisms, assuming I was in the midst of a conversation. It's only much later, only after trying to digest his shards of discourse, that you realize, as I do time and time again, you were mostly talking to yourself. In truth, he was more magician than executive. The door to the waiting room squealed on its hinge. The original assistant who greeted me at the elevator asked me to follow her to Mr. Ferreira's office. She didn't wait for my confirming reply and started down the hallway before I had fully gathered my binder-filled briefcase. The swish of my linen pants and the clatter of the assistant's heels reverberated in the vacuum of the hallway. I was led to a massive set of double doors flanked by identical receptionist desks. My guide stood to the side and gestured for me to advance through the midnight-stained teak doors. Teak, I don't know what that means. My hour had come. Of course I knock. I knocked lightly, refused to merely retreat back into the glass-encased limbo I had just escaped from, so I sheepishly turned my gaze downward, making clear my kowtow gesture of apology. I projected my humility into every corner, squeezing the door handle as tightly as I could, imagining the force of my clenching fist directly correlated to the strength of my modesty. The door from within snapped shut and Victor beckoned I enter. Attempting to regain some composure, I shuffled into the room and took the most immediate seat I could find. Victor stood. He loomed there like the stratocumulus formations I saw in the Malacca Strait, a high pillar ready to rain down on me. His face was the picture of stress, deeply lined with worries, undercolored from poor eating habits, ruddy from overactive socializing. Yet he held himself in a way that was more than mere confidence. His countenance was a challenge, an invitation to best wits, a barrier of power. He was an offspring of Prometheus, a bringer of fire, the trickster/sculptor who forged civilization as an act of defiance. But his physical person belied those projections, for his stature wasn't what you'd call imposing. Victor was the model of executive physique, bland. He wasn't tall or short, wide or trim, barrel-chested or sunken. He was a man in between, perhaps at one point more chiseled, but not fully in a state of decline. A passing glance would say that he was handsome, but it was more inoffensive than picturesque. That was Victor, an anonymous silhouette, encased in an unmistakable presence. My bag rested on my lap like a corpse. I folded my hands over the damning contents inside, as if preparing for the final sermon of my research before sending it into the great beyond. This is how I imagine I must have looked, because I took a deep breath to launch into a speech when Victor interjected. Tell me everything. Hey, Cyan. Well, I'm not feeling good, but feeling normal, I guess. Normal enough. My arm still hurts. Yeah. I think I still have a little bit of a fever. I'm on that fever threshold, you know? Sometimes it's fever, sometimes, well, I assume sometimes it's not, although I haven't gotten a non-fever result yet. Didn't have a fever, but I felt so bad after the second shot. Yeah, at some point, all my left side felt something. It wasn't exactly pain. Like, I had pain at the tips of my fingers and my toes. Yeah. I guess it's aches. It was a little bit of numbness too. For me, it was the extremities. The fingers, the toes. I would overfeel my fingers, but it was all the left side. That's not what happened to me. Yeah, but I got the Johnson and Johnson shot, so it's just one dose. Um, I hear that gives you worse side effects, but everyone is different anyway, so it's tough to compare, I guess. David got the one they don't like to give in America. My sister got that. She said it was bad. Why don't they like to give it? I mean, it's just one shot. I feel like that's half the trouble for all the services putting this together and for you. Somebody got a blood clot from it. Well, people get blood clots every day. That's the one that isn't recommended for women because of the fallopian tubes, right? Can get a blood clot on the fallopian tubes. Is that the one? Or am I mixing them up? Think so? Okay. Well, so far my fallopian tubes are fine. um, yeah, I actually haven't checked my temperature in a bit. I'll do it when I take a break, if I remember. But yeah, it wasn't exactly like it wasn't very bad. It wasn't bad. I mean, I'm not used to being sick because I'm never sick like that. I had a fever. I had a headache. I just felt like laying down and not doing anything. I tried doing dishes and my head started hurting a lot. So I decided against streaming. Basically, that's it. I didn't feel like having my head up, you know. I actually was set on streaming, but after doing the dishes, I just thought against it. I exhaled at the interruption, protruding my mouth in exacerbation. Frowning at the thought of merely following a screw directive, I plucked the binders from my bag and held out one for Victor to examine. He hesitated, but eventually slid across the carpeted floor to meet me where I sat. In one motion he reached into his jacket to retrieve his reading glasses and started immediately leafing past my introductory statements. He cursorily glimpsed past my citations and footnotes, pausing occasionally on the graphs with downward trajectories. We didn't speak while he paged through my analysis. Victor became absorbed in the research. With my packet in hand, he stood in order to pace about the room. I couldn't tell if this was a good or bad sign. However, I noticed his meanderings weren't as orderly as I had expected. He didn't merely strut back and forth or walked around in a circle. Instead, he zigzagged about his domain, hatching secret runes into the imported tapestry that covered most of the floor. Watching him, I realized I hadn't properly acquainted myself with the furnishings of this palatial office. It was impressive, but not outright gaudy. A decorator's touch was noticeable, but not heavy-handed. I could see moments where the CEO had intervened to satisfy his own ego. The typical framed pictures with smiling international dignitaries were discreetly relegated to one cabinet near the entrance. But the cabinet of trophies, awards, and various notable accolades that I would expect to see in an office of this magnitude and prestige was absent. Space that would have been dedicated to such things was instead occupied by pictures of his family and posed photo ops with pit bosses and engineering staff at various facilities signaling to anyone visiting, "My employees are like my family." I didn't think of Victor as the sentimental type, so I assumed that arrangement of photos must have been a strategic decision. I imagined him during negotiations walking visitors over to this area and telling a very compelling tearjerker in order to sway the attitudes of his adversary. He'd lean in close, almost whispering into the ear of his interlocutor, reciting his story with a tactical tone of empathy and compassion. His victim would be moved, clearing their throat or adjusting their tie, and would tell Victor they'd reconsider their position or withdraw their complaint, whatever it may be. I wonder if he'd try that maneuver on me. More importantly, I questioned whether I would have the willpower to withstand his maneuver. My scrutiny of Victor's interior decoration was further piqued by the lack of televisions. In many offices I had wandered into over the years, the low-volume murmuring of flat screen was a common fixture. Besides the pair of split-screen monitors stationed at his desk, Victor's office was remarkably tech-free. Even the lobby had a couple of TVs playing welcoming messages with brightly tinted infographics and stock photos of happy workers. The absence of screens made me reconsider Victor's focus. Regardless his determination to seek out information and act accordingly was, as far as I could tell, a marked difference from his competitors. But I wondered if this research was merely a point of leverage for Victor's vision for the future of his company. Would he share my findings? Would he set in motion the drastic yet necessary changes needed to avoid catastrophe? He was nearing the end of Section 8, my analysis of solvent extraction and alloy leaching, when he peered over the rim of his glasses to meet my gaze. "Hey, Toxic! How are you?" He soured, puckering his face in preparation for a bitter assessment of my work. "This doesn't look good." I nodded sullenly, interlocking my fingers over the unopened copy of the dossier on my lap. "No, Victor, it doesn't." He huffed in consternation, folded his glasses with one hand, and stood in the middle of the room. He surveyed his domain, assessing the impending fall of a kingdom under his reign. I didn't really want to say just Victor, but that's a more assertive way of speaking, I guess. Those choices were too similar, though. Eyes darting back and forth, Victor calculated the various possible outcomes of what he had just read. He shuddered slightly, squeezing his lips into a tight, thin line, as if having just drank a double shot of cachaça. Which, for you guys, is moonshine, I guess? Placing his glasses back upon the bridge of his nose, he returned to my document where he had left off. Taking long, emphasized strides, he moved behind his desk, pulled out his chair, and slowly eased into its padded seat. The chair rocked to a rhythmic squeal that Victor didn't seem to notice. I couldn't read his silence, so I pensively remained still. "Good old paint thinner, exactly. How goes it, Toxic? How are you?" I inhaled deeply, releasing a slow sigh. Our meeting thus far hadn't exactly met my expectations. The sudden emotional attachment I was feeling for my emotionless presentation of data gave me a dizzying sensation, as if the minor sway of the 19th floor in the Brazilian breeze was making me nauseous. Gravity was playing tricks on me. The heaviness of this room, the density of my dismay, the weight of my research, it bore down on me, as fast as hammer pounding against my heart. Victor gave no sign of capitulating to my concerns. I was beginning to wonder if he would even notice if I just gotten up and left. For all I knew, he was probably expecting it. Victor breezed through the next several sections, realizing, as I had initially estimated, that what he really cared about was the conclusion. I turned to the sound of papers flapping against themselves as he flipped to the end of my briefing. He reared his body up from the fortress he called the desk and again made the face of tasting something gone off. He clicked his tongue once or twice as if to prepare the room for the more violent noises that were about to emanate from his face and disturb our muted surroundings. But instead he cleared his throat and said, "So, we're in deep shit." Is that boots that step on shit? Al guessed at his summation, partially out of relief, partially out of unexpected brevity. I ventured a response. That's one way of putting it. I explained that my survey created a comprehensive analysis of the company's current operations and argued this scientific imperative for preventing further repercussions. Choosing my language carefully, laden with just enough jargon, I mustered a professorial tone in order to reinforce the salient message of my verdict. Opening my own copy of my research, I paged quickly to a specific graphic to emphasize my talking points. I could sense my explanation was not exactly satisfactory to Victor. It was as if every word I spoke further creased his taut poker face. I could see him clenching and unclenching his jaw, the muscles bulging at his temples in a tight rhythm that matched his wispy nasal breathing. My eyes searched his expression for any sign of receptiveness, but, as I've come to expect from Victor's acidic stare, I got very little indication that my imperations were met with any kind of sympathy. The veins stretched over his tensing upper jaw pulsed with a quiet energy. It was clear that all my statements were being measured against his bottom line, a series of calculations that even I couldn't predict. I continued to offer my professional opinions, despite Victor's obvious growing impatience, and felt that the veracity of my claims were slipping through my own grasp. I could tell I was starting to spiral, not quite in free fall, but assuredly pinwheeling into obscurity. Emphasizing oblique data points was not going to assist my case. Victor had already read between the lines. He already saw the hidden messages nestled between bar graphs and histograms. He hadn't come this far without being able to detect the subtlety of data. I hesitated a moment to catch my breath. I tried to disguise an inward sigh that came with my exaggerated inhale. An arched eyebrow flashed across Victor's face, and he placed the binder onto the absurdly low coffee table that rested in front of me. I noticed Victor already earmarked some of the pages so that his henchmen could dissect my research at a later date. Or maybe they were dog-eared for his PR goons to appropriate for positive spin. Fixing up dinner, delayed. Taking a break from League of Legends. So you decided to try to be happy? Is that it? Could be that Victor saw something in those pages that I didn't, or noticed discrepancies that I had somehow overlooked. My speculation was veering into self-doubt, a sign that no matter what my approach had been up to this point, Victor had put me on the defensive. I had to readjust. Victor crossed his arms, possibly sensing I was about to change tactic. Yes. Well, if there's one way to be happy, it's to never play League of Legends again. I approve. None of what I said is actually news to you, is it? Regardless, my strategy, ill-advised as it is, seemed to have some positive effect. He removed his glasses in the same exaggerated motion as before and rested his chin on his palm in a rehearsed, far-thinking pose. Rubbing the day-old stubble peered on his liver-spotted jawline. Victor contemplated adjusting his schoolmaster-in-training attitude. He cleared his throat, whipped his hands behind his back, smacking them together as he clasped them in place to maintain his peacocking posture. Some of it is news. To see a doctor soon. My right ankle is swollen bad. I hurt myself during vacation. Uh-oh. Well, did you make an appointment already? Actually, let me see if I still have a fever. Ow. He frowned at his own response, realizing that any amount of honesty afforded to me might be a mistake. I could tell he was a man that didn't enjoy being off guard. Who was unused to conversing, more accustomed to giving commands. I grinned meekly in acquiescence. The minor tells in the Mister's reception to my report gave me some idea of his leanings. But I still couldn't tell if the discussion was going to alter the direction of our imminent troubles. I'm sure Victor could sense my unease, but I too could tell that holding a meeting for longer than 15 minutes in his personal office with anyone other than a potential acquisition executive was a rare activity. Possibly it was grating to him that the conversation had gone as long as it did, expecting instead that I merely deliver my news and make a quick exit. A crisp, synthesized chirp interrupted the dampened room. Victor's desk phone was ringing. He lingered in the middle of the room, refusing to even look in the direction of the noise emanating from the russet surface. The sound erupted again, this time sending Victor into an oddly dignified fit of movements in order to descend onto the VoIP headset with a staunch, white-knuckled temper. He melted across the room, glancing back at me. I'll just be a moment. Even if unexpected, Victor wouldn't let any minor interruption halt his opportunity to have the last word with me. Collecting himself, he snatched the handle off the receiver and tersely alerted whoever was on the other end that their sudden presence, albeit remote, was unwelcome at the moment. His pinched face and severe brows softened momentarily. His eyes twitched back and forth as if he was reading an invisible memo trapped inside his skull. His initial instinct to berate the caller now seemed uncalled for, and it made me deeply curious as to the content of their conversation. Victor read my obvious eavesdropping and glared at me before sitting down to swivel his back to me. His tone turned gentle, speaking slow and brief. Found the perfect meme, put it on Discord, and I'll check it in a second. Caller did most of the talking, and I could make out a heavily compressed sing-song cadence from the earpiece. It sailed into the room at a decibel with barely higher just barely higher than the walk, intersped with Victor's affirming grunts and tender agreeing phrases. He spoke a combination of Portuguese and English, peppering industry jargon with more personal appraisals. Maybe this was another facet of his executive acumen, a hidden, compassionate tone to balance his otherwise ruthlessness. But I was only assuming that this was the case, since when it came to the actual business side of how the company ran, I had trouble deciphering the economics of it all. Finance was never my strong suit. Actually, speaking of memes, I watched the Addams Family, the two movies, Addams Family and Addams Family Values. They have meme-worthy content. I like your meme, Echo. Toxic should check it out too. Alright. I still have a fever, but it's like the minimum amount to be feverish. Thought of her when I saw it. Yes, very appropriate. For me to pretend that I knew how Victor actually behaved as an executive was misleading, since I had hardly ever seen it firsthand. I could only glean his activities via the occasional newspaper clipping or Bloomberg interview. His reputation was well regarded, but that standing was amongst other like-minded global capitalists. I suppose my distrust for Victor wasn't personal. It was grounded in an avid skepticism of people like him. Men in power, men making decisions that gravely affect people, communities, and cultures. I could never admire men like him, mostly because they only admire men like themselves. Victor's phone call was dragging on, but he seemed content to stay on the line. I was starting to grow uncomfortable in my over-designed seat, staring down at the cover of my binder. The possible futility of further conversation started to dawn on me. I couldn't sit still any longer. I rose quietly to stretch my legs. It was with a faint, fairly uninspired composition, and questionably expensive. It was a fairly uninspired composition, and questionably expensive. The piece could easily complement any boardroom or presidential suite decor. Where is it? Yeah, General. I imagined the creator actually laboring to achieve this level of inoffensiveness. Beyond innocuous, the artwork actually had a sublime, forgettable quality that its author had probably spent several decades owning. I wondered if the maker had imagined their life's work leading up to this moment, entombed as an ornament for businessmen wanting to appear culturally refined. But then again, who am I to talk? Here I was, my research meant to appease a different kind of insecurity. I wasn't giving the artists enough credit. Maybe their piece was never actually intended for Victor, but rather meant for people like me that never thought they'd end up in scenarios like this. Victor abruptly spun around to place his elbows on the desk, following my movements with a rather uncharacteristic blank stare. Don't know what you're looking for. My Discord? The General tab? The very last post? Still talking into the phone, he spoke in deliberately louder English so that I could clearly hear his side of the conversation. Yes, I'm with them right now. We're going over the survey. Not good, no. Not good at all. I'll call you back later. Ciao. He steadily placed the receiver back down, clicking it back into place with aggressive emphasis. The combination of casual demeanor and honest assessment convinced me he must have been talking to someone he held in very high esteem. Possibly an intimate confidant or even a back-channel competitor. The mere fact he didn't immediately dismiss their call was evidence enough to assume the caller was someone even Victor couldn't refuse. Maybe he secretly timed the phone call to give him a strategic break in our dialogue, like a nervous date asking a friend to call them in 5 minutes in order to make an excuse for postponing the remainder of the awkward evening. That seemed petty at best. The phone call must have been unplanned, regardless of its welcome break from dealing with my discoveries. I crossed myself, standing in the middle of the room, striking a pose as if I deserved an explanation. He remained seated, removing his deeply veined hand from the receiver and resting his arms atop his ergonomically sculptured armrests. Unwilling to endure another stalemate, I decided to pick up where we left off. I hope you understand the gravity of my findings. My research didn't merely outline the remaining amount of minerals and rare earth metals left on Earth. It put forward recommendations on how to curb the current rate of extraction and how best to proceed. Optimization of current processing and smelting procedures could easily be applied for elongating the inevitable. Additionally, in Section 10, I provided summaries of cutting-edge research in synthetic alternatives to silver ore production, and gave approximate estimates for manufacturing costs with timeline considerations. Leave me alone and leave. No. Bullies? It was Echo. It was all Echo. I just laughed at it because I think it's appropriate. Because Echo is 100% right. It was all David. No. As a scientist, I felt it my responsibility to avoid providing data alone. I felt offering solutions or suggesting that there are ways the company can continue to thrive without much financial sacrifice might benefit my overall arguments for slowing down. What incarnation? Hello, Arrogance. How are you? Steve. I tried to show him the silver lining. Certainly this was meant to appeal to Victor and his shareholders, men of deep pockets and narrow imagination. The mister rose from his creaking seat, digesting my analysis. He nodded to himself several times. Silently, sullenly, without projecting any solutions he might be arriving to, he scratched at his temples. My statements weren't exactly revelatory, but I felt it my duty to say them. Victor needed to know that this wasn't just a pet project of his. The information contained in my binder painted a bleak picture, to be sure. Victor understood the complexity of what my research presented, and I didn't want to harangue him into action. Presenting any kind of ultimatum would be a non-starter. I had no power or leverage to do so. Besides, the NDA I signed presented a litigious scenario that I couldn't fiscally or mentally afford. What's going on here? Well, apparently we are delivering a survey about the dark future of the planet to our boss. It's only on Switch, yes. Well, actually, no. It's the only console it's on, but it's also on PC and Mac. It sounds cheery. Well, that's what games are for. How are you, though? But yeah, I actually was thinking that before, Cyan. Switch almost paying for itself. Pretty soon, I think. So is it like Human Destroy Planet perspective? Yeah, apparently. I mean, I don't know if that's this has choices along the way, so I don't know. Um, I don't know how it changes, right? But with the choices I've made, at least it's about the depleting minerals and resources of the planet. Apparently, something that the company I work for mines. Don't make me make you dinner. Don't. No cannibal meals from you, Echo. Please. Damn it. I'm. I'm not watching The Addams Family anymore. Presenting any kind of ultimatum? No, I read this. I had seen colleagues destroyed by unruly sponsors unsatisfied with funded research. Friends and peers alike have been stripped of status at the hands of dark money and shell corporations. Nowadays, whistleblowers, even in countries with so-called stable democracies, have been put in the crosshairs. Some crushed in the courts, others blackmailed into silence, and others still put in physical peril. The price of speaking truth to power had come with a high premium. These thoughts crept through my mind as I awaited Victor's response. At any point, he could call in security, confiscate my passport, smash my phone, shred my survey, and altogether deny the existence of my work or my life for that matter. Did he just have that kind of authority? Did he have that kind of authority? Was he someone that could erase a person off the face of the planet? He certainly had the power to do this with minerals, extracting their worth and their foregoing any consequence. What could be so different with people? My paranoia was starting to spiral out of control, but I couldn't help but think my typical overly cautious suspicions weren't completely unfounded. I tried to silently fish out my phone when Victor noticed I was getting nervous. Is everything all right? I'm fine. You don't seem fine. His retort was flat but sinister, a statement cut from a dull blade. He grinned at my discomfort and my inability to hide my feelings. Sensing the upper hand, he felt at liberty to admonish my disloyalty as a paid consultant, using all the staid cliches of dogs, hands, and foolish eating habits. He said he understood why I was behaving the way I was, hitting full stride with his disappointed father rhetoric. His body language became big, his ego ballooning to fill the room with a confident gas. A poisonous gas that could choke all the rainforests of Brazil. Perhaps that's why there weren't any plants in his office. But he led up, relishing in his momentary victory. A round one. The spark of discourse meant that Victor had more to say, and I wasn't ready to throw in the towel just yet. Victor apologized for not being more loquacious. His words, not mine. Emptying his lungs revealed a hidden fragility. I could tell that he wanted to justify his perspective, providing anecdotes of tough decisions he's made in the past. He spoke about his ascension to the 19th floor, from unlikely routes and previous employers, reminiscing about his days as an insurance executive. He smirked. Much of what he was doing was similar to the work he had done then, assessing risk, measuring the world's pitfalls against its opportunities, tempering hopes against fears, finding every potential to squeeze profit out of tragedy. Ooh, I could go for some ice cream. I do have chocolate cake, though. No drumsticks, but chocolate cake. So better. And I have homemade grandma lasagna, so not made with actual grandma. Much of what he was doing now was similar to the work he had done then. No, I read that. He admitted the work troubled him initially. Using abstract formulas in order to determine best-case scenarios was an alienating experience. This modern method stood in stark contrast to the face-to-face business mentorship of a previous generation. In time, he said, he realized that these new analytical tools would only become more pervasive. Not because shareholders had found new, supposedly exciting ways to thicken their portfolios, but because it gave men like him platforms to mitigate their guilty conscience. The freedom, again, Victor's term, and one I would rarely use in this instance, these models afforded were too enticing for any individual that had harbored any moral scruples. Now, hard decisions were computational. Machines provided the executive class an out for their inhumanity. This isn't exactly what Victor was saying. I was interpreting the mealy-mouthed verbal gymnastics he posed for justifying whatever decision he came to at the end of our conversation. I let him pratter on, tracing the circumference of his globalist perspective with self-congratulating phrases. This was one of those moments where I could tell I was merely an object in the room to change the timbre of Victor's voice as it bounced around the room, a sonic dampening to remind Victor he wasn't alone. Being a flashy muffler wasn't meant for me. I interrupted. Gonna play my mom games? Still better than League. Enjoy Candy Crush. Do people still play Candy Crush? Raid Shadow Legends. I have a friend that's super addicted. He plays like every day. Raid Shadow Legends, not Candy Crush. Hidden Object? Oh, that's what Throw plays too. My mom plays this Overcooked like games. That's cool though. We like Overcooked. Well, at least I do. So what are you going to do now? The remainder of his sentence trickled out of his mouth like the last drops of mercury from a burst thermometer. The words splashed softly on the floor, solidifying on the carpet, a deep stain on Victor's pride. Agape, stunned and boiling, he said, "What makes you think I tell you that?" He spat the words, cheeks reddening, nostrils flaring. He clenched his jaw, and I could hear the crown caps of his teeth grinding against each other, fake animal turning to fine powder. I stood fast, waiting for another retort, another admonishing, another typical expression of self-appointed superiority. Awaiting his response fueled my own inner rage, the anger that had been seething since taking this job. The anger of excavation, dug up over and over again for every site visit I saw with shoddy conditions and back-breaking labor. That anger sank deep, up plumb line, and weighted with a heaviness that only the most bitter instruments could measure. That anger so dense, thicker than any alloy, bound together so strong that no smelter could distill, no sintering could liquefy. 110 of them, so might as well. Oh, yeah. It's free to play garbage. Don't feel bad or don't feel good. But I don't feel anything. Just saying that I like Overcooked. Also, I should try moving out. Yesterday, before my fever, I actually played a little bit of Dragon Ball Fighter Z. I missed it for some reason. Was trying to see if there was still enough content to make a stream out of it. But only if I go and play online, I guess. I actually did a ranked match and won, so I have I have 100% wins online. Ranked. What a god. Prepared to leave. I couldn't bring myself to continue this conversation any longer. Victor didn't stop me. He didn't bother a faint attempt at imploring me to stay. My briefcase felt heavier than when I had arrived. Pulling at my shoulder, straining the socket, fanning my fingers. I inhaled deeply, raising my chest to align my spine. I mustered a final entreaty. You can stop this. My plea was met with tepid enthusiasm. Victor didn't need his ego inflated more than it already was, but I wasn't pandering to his desire for a lasting legacy. I was clinging onto the hope that Victor's keen sense of opportunity might outweigh his desire to maintain the status quo. Flickers of imagination sparked behind the stoic stare, and I shrugged to communicate that he should at the very least think about it. Consider the magazine profiles, the accolades, and the clamoring congratulations from all sides. But this wasn't what motivated Victor. Glory was not his game. I'll take what you reported into consideration. Victor couldn't be swayed with righteousness or altruism because he couldn't act on their unpredictable outcomes. There was no model to account for selflessness because it had no bottom line. One could blame his education, or his upbringing, or the elitist culture that bred Victor's attitude. One could cite his mentoring, or the corrupting advice of his former superiors, or the underhanded behavior of his peers. But if one wanted to pinpoint when, where, and how Victor became the man who stood before me, the apathetic apparition that he is and will always be, one would be hard-pressed to come up with concrete answers. Victor is actually through. He buried his hands into his pockets after a long pause, indicating to me that the conversation had reached its natural conclusion. Victor looked in my general direction, but refused to meet my eyes. Eventually he turned to face the floor, to ceiling windows that looked out at the teeming bay below. I imagine him standing long after my departure, watching the paragliders and tourists basking in the warming sun. From Victor's standpoint, those bodies below were all part of one whole, a constituent of potential clients, a populace of consumers. I wondered if he would consider how his own product would be their undoing. Those bodies would turn to dust under the beating sun, but he would be shielded up here, sheltered by the cool concrete of the 19th floor. I swept up my bag and saw myself out. There were no receptionists waiting for me on the other side of Victor's heavy doors, no greeting party to usher me into oblivion. I wished for someone to come, to muster comfort as I crossed the threshold back into the crumbling reality of an ignorant world. But there was no one there. No shepherd, no guide, no ferryman to help me cross the river Styx. I meandered back to the elevator, waiting for it to envelop me in its aluminum and steel cage, bringing me back down to the surface, back to earth. Back down. The lobby floor indicator dinged, jolting me out of my daze. I lingered for a moment before shuffling out into the vacuous lobby. Halting in what felt like the precise middle of this cavernous space, I felt an immense isolation. My bag, now half empty, sagged in my limp fist. Inside held a ruin, the remains of my life, of all those lives that will be devastated by what will come next. My ears rang with the high-pitched squeals that emanated from security clearance kiosks. Employees scanned their badges, tipping their hat to the on-duty officer, stretching meek smiles taut with pretend politeness. I wondered if the pain of putting on those faces was due to some internal conflict, was making an effort to appear content with aiding what ails the planet more strained than I imagined. Did the passive wave of the officer, the nonchalant nod of understanding, smooth over their guilt? Did they have any such remorse? It was hard to tell at this distance, a span measured in meters and morals, a length whose dimensions I no longer knew how to quantify. I had spent the last year trying to mold my observations into data, turning estimates into certainties, trying to perform that task now seemed beyond foolish. How does one map human decisions? There is no algorithm to resolve a conflicting self, no equations for solving the human spirit. Maybe therein lies the flaw of thinking I could do anything to change Victor's mind. He and all those men in power who shape the world with their well-researched yet ill-fated decisions is not a variable in some computation. His manner, his motivation, his presence will always fall outside the scope of my survey. For all of my projections, he will always remain the one factor that will prevent solutions from reaching a place of equality. But it can't be all left up to men like Victor. Time is coming yet, time when Victor's choices will catch up to him. Time when the choices I and others make will undo all they've done. Well, that's a hopeful ending, but I don't think I got a great ending there. An essay game by Nicholas O'Brien. Alright, we did it. That is the last survey. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Not fury, but that's what art is, isn't it? It makes you feel something. What does it all mean? Oh, that is for you to decide. I think it's pretty clear, though. Just telling you that maybe the big decisions about the world shouldn't be left to one or two people in power. It was a neat indie game. It was. I liked it. I like these type of short experiences. So they asked me. We basically played an hour. They asked me to play 30 minutes of this. But I think if I wasn't talking to chat, 30 minutes would be just playing the entire game, maybe. Or very close to that. So because I was talking and interacting, I ended up doing it all. Because otherwise, I wouldn't be doing it right. Do it? Do what? Spam ping? I don't even know what that means. Do you want me to tag an opponent for you so you can kill it? Anyway, that's it. I feel a little hot. But I'm going to try to hang in there. I was thinking of maybe starting a new game, but you're looking pretty hot, thank you. But I think it's a better use of my time if I do hard mode on Deus Ex now. So I think we should start that. And get that out of the way. So no new game. Whatever floats your proverbial boat. Yeah, I think so. Some human revolution. And when that's done, we start Final Fantasy XIV. Again. Start again. When is it over? Campaign ends August 23. Yeah, we have time to finish Deus Ex again. Sidol. What? You tried, Arrogance, you tried. So yeah, let me change all the connections, get out of my Switch, and I will be right back. I'm taking a break. I will be right back with Deus Ex. It won't be long.